Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I am your host, Benedikt, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hey, Benny. I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm great too. Thank you. I'm kind of losing my voice right now, but other than that, I'm okay. It's all good.
I know the pain. I was making our key spike course. Anybody that isn't somehow aware, you're living under a rock, but we just released Mixes Unpacked, a little mixing course that Benny and I did together. And one of the bonus modules is going to be a course on, we called it like a bonus module, but it's really like its own little course, but it's getting included with Mixes Unpacked right now. And it is kind of like a masterclass on how to make key spikes and different uses for them, and how to do it in a proper way that's not going to, I shouldn't be getting into this, but essentially people try to use drum samples and they do more harm than good if they're not careful. So we're trying to avoid that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because while filming that, I totally lost my voice as well. We do a lot more talking than we used to now with the podcast and filming video content. It's a ton of talking.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's even more coming up. We can't talk about it at this point, but like we have plans, and so we gotta somehow level up and not lose our voices when we do that. So yeah, let's jump in. So today, by the way, if you want, before we get to today's episode, I need to do some housekeeping. I need to do some of the things I always tend to forget when we do the episodes. So first of all, please, if you get something out of these episodes, share these episodes with your friends. And also, and this whole podcast, also please leave us a review on your podcast platform. By the way, you can do that on Spotify now as well. This wasn't a thing up until recently, but now you can. So you can leave a review or a rating on Spotify. We prefer and love Apple Podcast reviews though. So if you're there, or if you have the app, just would you please go there and leave us a 5-star review, ideally with a text. That would be much appreciated. We'd really love you. If you do that, we love you anyways, but even more so if you do that. And
yep. Choosing favorites.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final thing, if you want a framework for how to make exciting sounding records yourself as a self-recording band, you can get my 10-step guide to successful DIY recording, the ultimate 10-step guide to successful DIY recording. And you can get that if you go to theselfrecordingband.com/10-step guide. I keep forgetting, I always forget to mention that, but like it's really great. It's free. It's a little mini ebook type of thing. You can download that, and it's a great starting point. And it shows you the steps from start to finish, the whole production process. It gives you a very structured framework for that. So theselfrecordingband.com/10-step guide. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into today's episode.
Hold on. You're not going to tell people why we brought up reviews?
Should we mention it?
Yeah, we gotta tell them. I think it's hilarious.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
This is episode 114 you're listening to right now, by the way. I'm extremely proud of that number. It's a lot of hours of talking and getting to talk about music, and thank you all for listening so much for potentially like 114 hours. It's insanity.
Yes,
it's probably a little less than that because they're not all that long, but some of them totally are. And we just got our first negative review. It's not even a negative review. It's just a not review. We got a 1-star, which is the lowest rating possible. But they didn't write anything, and we're optimistic that they didn't mean to. So what does this mean for you, people that are listening to this podcast and do like what we're doing? It means that you got to go and leave us a 5-star review, and outweigh this 1-star review that is dragging us down. And it actually does help us. The podcast, like the people look to see how many positive reviews it has. I always read the reviews before I start a new podcast, make sure it's worth the time. So it really does help us very much. And having this one disgraceful 1-star review from a complete internet troll is not doing us any favors. So please help us.
Exactly. Thank you so much for helping us out. And if you did that accidentally, maybe you should check your. Maybe you should all check your Apple Podcast apps if you accidentally hit the 1-star. And if you are, like, we assume it was an accident, and just go and correct that. No, but just like help us out, leave a 5-star review. And also, we should mention that it's not only about helping us out, like there's something in it for you too, because if you do that, we sometimes have guests on our show, and we want to do more of that in the future as well. And the better the rating is, the more reviews we have, the higher the chances of getting amazing people on our show, because those people check that as well to see if it's worth their time. And so if you want us to have more awesome people on the show who can share their knowledge and like wisdom and stories with you, then it absolutely helps to have more reviews. Because, with podcasts, it's not like with YouTube where you can see the subscribers and numbers and all that. Only we see that on the back end. But like if somebody looks up the podcast and sees a bunch of really cool reviews, and which helps us rank and all of that, then they are much more likely to come on the show. So
totally. Yeah. That would be very appreciated. And I can't imagine what we would have done to offend somebody to get a 1-star review.
So that's why I give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, it's probably been an accident. I just hope so. But we have to correct it. All right. So to today's episode. It's about guitar again. So last week we've been talking about guitar technique, so that the tone is all in your hands. This week it's also about guitar, but it's not about the performance. It's about the actual engineering, and it's about miking guitar cabs and capturing guitars like real rigs. There's an application for software amps as well here, but like capturing guitar rigs. That's how I call it, and why it's important to really know your rig and especially your cab. And I came up with this episode because I did a masterclass on like last Friday for a German recording magazine. They invited me to do a masterclass, which was super, super, super cool. Like, it was a 6-hour live mixing stream that I did for their people, which was awesome. And they had like Q&As in between. And then there was one person. They were all great, but like there was the question of like, what would I recommend? Would I recommend starting with one mic and keeping it simple, or would I recommend like basically throwing everything you have at a cab and then trying to come up with a cool blend? Like how would I start, and what would I recommend bands who work with me and send me their stuff? I had a very clear answer to that, and it made me think and want to do this episode today, because I think a lot of people have it backwards, where they don't really know their rig and their cab and what that sounds like on its own and how to capture that properly. And so and they, before they do that and learn that really, they start throwing like 8 mics at the cab and try to solve their tone problems by doing that. This is a really common thing. And in this Q&A, we even talked about a story. Another person on the call said he said he saw a post in a forum somewhere in a Facebook group where somebody was literally like posting a picture with 8 mics on the cab, and he's like, it somehow doesn't sound right. What is your opinion? Like, does that look good, or something along the lines of that? Like, how do you even judge that? You see a picture with 8 mics on the cab, and like the person's asking like what to do, Like, first of all, it's just a picture, and then second of all, like there could be so many potential problems with a setup like that, and I would just recommend like starting with one and seeing what that sounds like, and even without a mic, what it sounds like in the room, what the thing sounds like that you're trying to capture, and then go from there. And that's what we're trying to do in today's episode. So we're gonna try to walk you through what it is that makes the tone of a cab, what goes into that, how to listen for that, what you can try to do to experiment with things, where you can start putting your first mic and stuff. So we're gonna walk you through this process basically. We try to keep it simple. And at the end, you should have a process to really get to know your rig, your cab, and then you can much more confidently put a mic in front of it and capture it, and then you'll know whether or not you need a second one or a second amp or a second cab or anything else to blend with that. Right? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally makes sense. I think when you described like the photo with like 8 mics on a single amp, I think that describes a lot of people when they're getting started, and we overcompensate when we're not sure what to do. You see it on drums all the time. People just like being like, all right, there's like, I used every channel on my interface to do a different weird room setup. And it's like, well, you forgot to mic the snare. Like, it's okay. Like, all of this extra experimentation is super rad and cool, but it should only be done once you've hit like got the fundamentals and essentials locked. Those need to come first, always, every time.
Yes.
So that's what this is about. Making sure you get the fundamentals and essentials of a cab figured out.
Exactly. So my answer to that question is almost always like the question, what I would recommend is always like start with one amp, mic, and cab, like one rig and then one mic in front of it. Learn everything about it and make it sound as good as you can. And only then add a second, whatever, like amp, cab, or mic. And most importantly, learn the rig even before you throw a mic at it. I think you should learn what the thing sounds like that you're trying to capture and where there are different spots on that thing that are going to sound different. There are different things you can just learn the thing you're trying to record, So, all right. I sort of came up with a framework, as always, like a process that I'm going to walk you through. So I'd say, assuming that you use guitar speakers with more than one, like guitar cabs with more than one speaker in it. If you have just one, then the first thing, you can skip that. But if you have a 2x12 or a 4x12 cab, then you got to know that all speakers within a cab sound different. So you have to compare them. So you cannot assume that it doesn't matter which one you're going to mic. So just maybe do the experiment, or not maybe, just absolutely do the experiment and like run a DI or something, reamp it, run it through the amp, a loop of something. So turn it down quiet enough so that you can actually listen closely to the cab, and then just listen to the 4 speakers at very low volume, obviously, but just listen and see if you can spot differences. Maybe one of them isn't working at all. Like I had that. Like when I did live sound, I was miking. There was a couple of times where I was miking a cab, and I was wondering why I didn't get any like signal, or like low, just a very low signal. Turns out that one of the 4 speakers just didn't work, So
yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah. So just listen to that. Maybe grab, or maybe one is broken, or all sorts of things can happen. So listen to the speakers. Then also you can turn them up and just put a mic in front of the speakers. Like put it dead center. Just try to put it dead center. Do that on all 4 speakers and see if you can spot like major differences in the behavior or the tone of the speaker. And then when you found the one that you like most, then just make a note or mark it on the cab. That's why you often see that people have marked their favorite speaker on a cab, for example.
Yeah.
So that's how I would start. Then, yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Any stories on that?
Yeah, well, I love that you actually just said that's why people mark it. I remember loving that when a band would come in with an amp and they've got like the little tape corners marked off for like, we put a mic here, and I liked it. It's like, well, that's a really good clue. Why don't we start there and see how that sounds? And if you're not convinced to do that for yourself, because like maybe you just don't record yourself that often, or you use an amp sim when you record, that's fine. But you should still do this. You should still learn your live amp if you're using a speaker live, and mark off your favorite spot. And then your sound tech's always going to, like, whenever you go to a show, whoever's doing sound there is going to probably do the same thing, have the same opinion that I just had of like, oh, they liked it when they had an SM57 right there. I'll just do the same thing. That takes some guesswork out of my job. Like and you're going to get a more consistent sound as well. So by doing that work up front, you're kind of providing yourself a favor for the rest of gigging and recording. Yeah, totally worth the time.
Totally. And I would say, even if you don't use real amps, first of all, I know for a fact that a lot of people who use amp sims have an amp and they want to learn how to do it or want to know more about it. We get asked that all the time. So there's that. But even if you're not planning to do that, I think you're going to understand your amp sims better, because they are just a simulation or emulation of the real thing. So we'll get to some things that you can actually apply to amp sims as well. And even the stuff like picking the right speaker or just learning what the speaker sounds like, I think just that concept of knowing that a speaker is so important and that you can learn it is cool for amp sims too, because there's different IRs, there's virtual mics that you can move around, all these things. So please still pay attention, and I think it's valuable whether or not you use real amps. So the next thing is
I'm busy here.
Malcolm, in case you're wondering, Malcolm's cat just completely covered him on the camera.
Yeah, I've been trying to stop her from jumping on the desk for like a couple minutes now.
It's cute though. So yeah, the next thing would be different impedances. What I mean by that is obviously there are cabs with like fixed impedances, and this is just what they sound like. But first of all, you can connect them to different outputs on your amp without breaking anything. Like there's usually more, not always, but there's often more than one option. And I won't go too far into that now because I don't want anyone to break their amp because of my advice, but just know, read up on that, because there is more than one way to connect an amp to a speaker usually without causing damage. It's different for transistors and tube amps, but you don't have to exactly match the impedance sometimes. Like there is intentional, intentional mismatch is a thing. If you like, it depends on a couple of things, but like do your research on that. And then what you definitely can do is, if you want to match things just to be safe, that's what I would recommend now in this episode. There are cabs that with a switchable sort of impedance, you can run them with like 8 ohms or 16, or then there's the Marshall cabs where you can switch between the mono and stereo sort of operation where only 2 of the 4 work and stuff like that. And not only do the speaker configuration change sometimes, but like a different impedance will sound different. The load on the amp is like different. How hard the amp has to work to drive the cab is different. The headroom changes. Like a lot of things change. So when you change the impedance, the sound is going to change. So I'm not telling you like a better way or what the correct way is, but like just know that there's a difference and just compare. To compare at equal volume, record 2 signals, then compare in the DAW at equal volume and see what the differences are, if you can hear any, and if so, what you prefer. So this is just something you should just try if you haven't done it yet, because there is a difference.
100%.
Then there is the volume and cab saturation, and the difference when it comes to that between open and closed cabs. So what I mean is, up to a certain volume, it's always going to sound a little different, but there's going to be a pretty linear thing up to a certain volume. But then at a certain point, your speaker will start to saturate, will start to compress, because the speaker is moving back and forth and is pushing air. And when the speaker is reaching its limit, it doesn't move the same way anymore. So you can think of up to that point, it's like a smooth back and forth movement, and above that point, you get sort of wrinkles in that movement. I don't know how else to say that. I always view it as like a clean sine wave, and at some point you get the wrinkles in it, basically because the speaker doesn't fully make the full movement anymore, but it like gets faster, or it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just something that I see in my head. But like, I mean, maybe you saw that when you saw a slow-mo picture of a speaker moving, and then when it's full on, it doesn't go back all the way anymore. It like sort of stays there and moves faster. So that sort of thing, just not as extreme. So there is a cab saturation and compression happening at a certain level, a certain volume, and it's different for open and closed cabs, because with an open cab, the air can be pushed out of the cab on the backside. And with a closed cab, this is not possible. So closed cabs tend to saturate a little earlier because the speaker can't move as freely as with an open cab. So again, I'm not giving any recommendations here. I'm just saying try that. I'm just saying record quietly and then record very loud if you can, and then level match the 2 recordings and compare them in your DAW and see how your speaker behaves at different volumes. It might be a very flat linear thing up to a certain spot. It might be changing gradually with increased volume. Every speaker behaves a little differently, but you might find a sweet spot where your speaker sounds particularly good for your sound, your tone. It's just something to be aware of.
It really does change, and it changes how you play, I think, as well. You'll start, like, the speaker reacts differently, and like you said, it kind of compresses differently, so you'll probably end up adjusting your playing, and some people might find that they dig playing an amp that's pinned versus not. So totally worth experimenting with. This is just going to also affect your room sound. So the total volume of how hard you're pushing a speaker changes that speaker response, but it also changes your room response. So it's something to consider as well.
Absolutely. And I would always recommend doing the equal volume comparison or equal loudness comparison, because like if you're standing in the room in front of the cab, there's no way you can compare that, like a very quiet amp to a very loud amp. So the only way to really compare that is like record it and then loudness matched, and then you can do a blind test or whatever. But like, there's no point in judging that and standing in front of the amp. Like, I can't tell you how many bands have been in my live room telling me that their cranked amp just sounds so much better, and they were trying to convince me by just showing me. And like, I'm like, I can't. Yeah, there's no point in doing that. Like, it's just way louder now, and my ears are sort of compressing because of the volume. I can't compare that to what you had before. We have to record it and then compare, So
yeah, totally.
All right. Yeah, and then the next thing would be the most obvious thing probably for most people, but it's still worth mentioning. It's the positioning of the mic on the speaker itself, or like how the speaker, it's not the cab, but the speaker that you've chosen, that the speaker sounds different at different positions. So in general, you can say that the center of the speaker, the dust cap, is the brightest spot on the speaker. Mm-hmm. The outside of the speaker, sort of the edge of the speaker, is the darkest, and also it's where the biggest like energy sort of is there. Like it pushes the most air on the outside, like right on the outside of the speaker. So it's not only darker, but it's also the sense of air being moved is the strongest there. And
Right.
so you can gradually move a cab from the center to the outside and just see how it changes and where you find your sweet spot. You'll find different resonances in different spots. You'll find that the sound gets brighter the closer you get to the center. Oftentimes, there's a sweet spot around where the dust cap meets the cone, sort of. This is sometimes or oftentimes where people start to get a good balance. But yeah, it's different for different people and different cabs. But just learn what your cab sounds like and what you actually like, and just play a loop, and then gradually move your mic across the speaker and just listen to that recording and figure out where you liked it most.
Yeah, totally. I remember being surprised at how different a speaker sounds depending on where the mic is placed. I didn't think it was going to be such a dramatic effect when I first started experimenting with that, because when you turn on your amp, it just sounds loud and like your guitar, and you can't really do the same thing by sticking your ear up to the speaker because it's super painful to do so. So until you shove a mic on there and start moving it around, that's really going to be the first time you experience like, oh, if I move it 2 inches this way, it's a very, very different tone.
Yeah, totally. I remember doing a lot of experimenting when I made the videos for the Self Recording Band Academy, our big recording course that we have. I did a couple of videos where and recordings where I compared different mic positions, and it's like, even though I've been doing this for so long, it still not surprised me, but it was fascinating to see how big the difference actually is, how much of a difference it is. And sometimes the EQ, or oftentimes actually the EQ moves that I make in the mix are not as drastic as like the difference between just putting it in a different spot. Like this is night and day. So
yeah.
And then there's one thing that I think tends to be forgotten often. It's not only about the difference between the center of the speaker and the outside of the speaker, but the speaker is a circle, right? It's round. So if you found, let's say, the sweet spot where the dust cap meets the cone, there's not only one spot like that. So you can go in a circle around the dust cap and compare how it sounds, because the speaker will not sound the same all around the thing. Like this is also different. So there's this wonderful plugin. I think I've mentioned it before on the podcast, the Mikko IR loader thing, Mikko, whatever it's called.
Totally, I remember.
So what's fascinating about this thing, other than it's just a great, than the fact that it's just a great tool, what's cool about it is if you move the virtual mic with that plugin, it's like a virtual cab that loads IRs in the background, but it lets you control and blend the IRs by moving a virtual mic. And it's not an algorithm. It's like it switches and blends IRs in the background. It's pretty cool. And the cool thing is, if you move the virtual mic around the speaker, you see, on the speaker in general, you see a graph next to it that shows you how the frequency response changes. And the interesting thing is, if you put a mic in a certain spot and then you pick the exact same spot on the opposite side of the speaker, it's a drastically different curve. So it's not the same all around the speaker. So like once you found the sort of the sweet spot between the center and the outside, move it around the speaker and see what you like most, because that's also changing. And I think most people, or a lot of people, haven't done that experiment yet. We start in the center and then we move it to one side, but we rarely move it up and down, for example, or things like that.
Yeah, it's there's so many options. It's kind of like option paralysis can happen pretty easy, but that's again why what a great thing to do on your own time, so you have time to experiment and go in with like some sweet spots picked out. You can have multiple little favorite spots and be like, just make a note of it somewhere, or people like to put just little pieces of tape, making a little corner so you know where the mic goes, and you could just write on the tape, this is a bright spot. Exactly. Something like that would be totally fine.
Totally. And I'm not saying you should do all of those experiments every time you record. Absolutely not. But I'm saying, as you said, Malcolm, in your spare time, on your own time, when the band is not there with you, you can and should experiment with that, just to learn your tools. And then you have that knowledge and you can make notes, and you have those tools available to you, and you can make full use of them the next time you record, right? It's like, I do the same thing. I mix all the time. And when I mix, I'm not experimenting. I mix, I do things I know work. I have my tool belt and my things that I like to use. But then in between mixes, when I have some downtime or when I intentionally schedule time to do that, actually, I'll do experimenting. I'll try things without a certain outcome in mind. I just go and experiment and learn my tools, basically. I pick a new tool every single time and I try to learn something about it. And the next time when I mix, I have new tricks that I can use or new tools. So, you should absolutely do that, learn it, and then you can apply that in your sessions. Now, do you know about the glue blob thing, Malcolm, on the speakers?
No, I'm totally curious what you're going to say about the glue blob.
Yeah. This is really something. I think one of our community members showed me that. I think Thomas Weishäupl, he's one of the earliest members. He was in the Self-Recording Band Academy beta tester team, basically. I think he showed me this. There's a video. I was aware of this phenomenon, but there's a really cool video that he showed me that explains it really well and made me think about it again. Nolly, the great producer we all know, Adam Nolly Getgood. He's the creator of Get Good Drums, and he's produced a lot of very cool, good-sounding modern metal records. And he's a very, I don't know how to say it, he approaches things in a very logical, also kind of scientific way sometimes. Like, he's obviously a great artist too, but he has a great way of explaining things, and it's all he does is like always very logical, and I just like his approach. So anyway, he has a video on YouTube where he explains the glue blob thing, and what it is if you look at a speaker on a guitar cab, if you take the grill off and you look at the speaker, there's this one, or like these two spots usually. There's these two little blobs where the soldering points, I think, on the back of the magnet or whatever, like are glued to, or that whatever is glued to the backside of the speaker. I don't have it in mind right now, but you know those two things. You see it in front of you, right? You have the dust cap and you have the two glue blobs, basically, or And the thing is, this is the arm almost always, or like always, this is the darkest spot on the speaker. Like, if you keep the distance to the center consistent. So if you put the mic there, the speaker there the response of the speaker is a little slower. It's a little darker. The transient response is a little more smeared, not as direct as everywhere else. So you can use that intentionally. And Nolly has a video on YouTube, because this sounds like a nuanced thing that you shouldn't care about. But like, watch that video and listen to the difference in the audio examples. Like, it's night and day. Everybody can hear that. It's a clear difference, and it's an artistic choice that you can make. If you put a mic right there, or if you have the grill on and you're not aware where the mic is, if you happen to put the mic right where the glue blob is, it's going to sound different compared to everywhere else on the cab. This is a very different spot, and you can accidentally hit it, or you can hit it intentionally, but it sounds different. It's just the mass of the speaker on this spot is like different compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
And it behaves differently. It's darker. It's a little slower. And it's just different. So
interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Some experimentation in my future.
Yeah, exactly. So the glue blob thing is one thing you can try. And then once you've done all that, there's another factor, another option that you have, and that is the angle of the mic. So I don't know some people just always do the dead-on thing. Other people like to experiment with angles a lot. So there's personal preference too. I found that angling it can sometimes give me a blend between two spots that I kind of like. So when I'm not sure if I want the brighter or the darker spot, and then I pick the darker but angle it towards the inside a little bit, then it kind of gives me best of both worlds sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So that is an application that I like. I think it sounds a little less direct because the air is not moving, like not hitting the mic directly. So it maybe, if you want the most transient impact, you maybe should go with the dead-on position, I think. Like, from a logical, I don't think I noticed it that much, but like, just thinking about it, that's what I would do at least.
No, I would agree. I think that I have similar findings. It's like, I tend to start, my default is pretty direct on, pretty close to center usually. And then it's easy to kind of swoop out from there. And same thing as you, if I want it to not be so brittle, but I'm worried about losing that kind of like clarity, I'll keep it, I'll move it to the side, but aim it in. So now we're off axis, still kind of pointing towards center. And that can be a good sweet spot for sure. Not always, but definitely can be the solution.
Yep, absolutely. And what I found, what gets affected most by the angle, at least to me, is the resonances that you have with the guitar cab. Like, there's always, with every guitar cab, there's always going to be these like very narrow, fizzy type resonances in it. Sometimes Sometimes you have more of those, sometimes you have less, but we're basically always battling those. We're always fighting those in the mix. And I think with changing the angle can be a solution to that. I find that if a cab has a really harsh sort of whistling frequency resonance that you just can't get rid of, the angle sometimes does it for me. That sometimes seems to smooth that out a little bit. So there's always, sometimes it's the combo. That is one of the cases where I would say try a second mic if that is the case, because sometimes you can get clever cancellations between the two. But like that, you can also get all sorts of trouble and problems. So again, I wouldn't recommend starting with that. But sometimes just with one mic, just angling it a little bit can make the whole curve a little smoother to me. And those resonances and resonant and whistling peaks sort of get a little flatter sometimes.
Totally.
Right. And then finally is the distance to the cab itself. This has there's two ways to think about that, I think. One is, of course, with increased distance, you're going to capture more of the room. If you're closer, it's going to be more direct. But also, depending on the mic you're using and its polar pattern, most mics, every mic that's directional, every mic that's not an omni, has a proximity effect, which means is the closer you are to the source, the more low end, the more bass you're going to get, the more bass you're going to capture. So you get a flat linear response only if you get the distance big enough to the source. So if you're really close to the source, you're going to get a more bass. It's the same like talking into these mics. Like I'm going to sound different here compared to over here. And so this is the proximity effect. And happens with a speaker as well. So yeah, if you want basically a fuller low end, you can get very close. And usually that's where most people start. If you think that it's too boomy, but you kind of like the overall tone and like turning down the bass knob doesn't really do it, then maybe just go back a couple of inches and see if that works, right? If your room is controlled enough to do that.
Yeah, and know that not all cabs put the grill the same distance away from the speaker. Right? So you might think, okay, I'm always right up against the grill, but like that changes depending on what cab you're grabbing. So you might find that you're closer than you're used to being and might want to try backing it off. Again, I actually do think starting probably up to the grill is probably a great idea. Getting close is for a starting point.
Yeah, I agree. And then finally, your room itself. That's also part of the rig in a way that you have to learn and take into consideration at all times, because you're not listening in a like anechoic chamber. You're listening in some sort of room. And so that's a factor. And it matters more than people think it does. Like even if you're miking close, even if you get really close to the mic, it can make a difference. Not always, but it can. I had recordings being sent to me where the band was like, we were as close as we can to the cab, and I could still hear weird room stuff going on. I could still hear it, and so I'm not saying, I don't think it's as much of an issue as with like drums, but I think it's still worth mentioning. And if you are in a very big live sort of room, very uncontrolled room, then I would always recommend building like a small fort around the cab. It's very easy to do, to just put a mattress left and a mattress right and some blanket over it and some blanket on the floor or something, and then do the comparison, and it will probably do the trick.
Yeah, I like to default to going dead. Kill everything. I just want that direct amp sound and knowing that like how slammed modern recordings are going to get. You don't want to be bringing up extra like ambiances that are just going to make your guitar thinner, really.
Totally. Yeah, that's basically the whole list. What I find interesting here is that last episode where we were talking about the hands and how much the tone is in your playing technique, and then this episode about learning your cab or cab simulation, like all these things, remember, all these things apply to your sims as well. There are amp sims that have a virtual mic that you can angle and move and all that. So if you haven't experimented with that, do it. I know a lot of people use the STL Tones Tone Hub and stuff, for example. It has a virtual mic where you can adjust the distance and the position and the angle and all of that, and even the resonance of the cab and like things like that. So you can experiment with that even in the computer. So what I want to say is all this, the stuff from last week's episode with the technique, plus this week's episode with the guitar cab and the room and mic positioning and the whole rig and learning all the nuances of it. I feel like with those two things, we've covered the most important and by like absolutely the biggest part of guitar tone, because everything else, like your amp settings, EQ moves in the mix and whatnot, like all this stuff does not matter if that part of it is wrong, if the source is wrong. And on the flip side, if the source is right, if your playing is great, you have a great instrument in your hands that you can play well, and you know your rig, you know what it sounds like, and you're intentional about capturing it, and you pick the right mic and the mic position and all that, then just a simple rig with one mic, the right playing technique and all of that will get you so far that like you can almost forget about anything you do in the mix, because like guitar tones are one of those few things that when they are right and they're almost mix ready. It's not like with a drum kit where you have to do crazy things to make it work. If the guitar tone is really right and the performance is great, it should just fit in the mix pretty well already. So this is so important. I feel like with these 2 episodes, we've covered so much, and I would have a lot less headaches when mixing other people's stuff if they would know and apply all these things.
Totally. Especially our previous episode, honestly.
Yes.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that all of this experimentation is now magically possible in the digital realm as well. I'm a big fan of the Neural DSP stuff, and they've got a camp sim on there that you can play with as well. And honestly, the first thing I do is unlink the amp and cab selection and start shooting out the different cab options inside of the plugin, and then I start tweaking from there on the mic position. And now Benny's got me on to external IRs, third-party IRs, loading those, and that's a whole nother can of worms as well. But I'm learning more and more every time I grab open up a different pack, and I'm just like, I can't believe how different these different positions sound. Same mic, same speaker, but different spot, totally different sound.
Totally. Yeah. And again, like, don't let this slow you down, or like, I don't want to cause more headaches than you already have, or like, I don't want to slow you down your creative process. Just if you're writing, if you're doing pre-pro, just pick a preset, move on, but like when it comes time to actually capture your final recording, you should, before you do that, like, you should have spent some time learning the thing you're going to use. And instead of like buying and trying 10 different things and throwing all the mics that you have at the source, pick one that you really want to use and learn all you can about it. And if you really still can't get the tone you want, then blend a second amp, then blend a second cab, use a second mic, whatever you need to do. But I really think instead of buying all those things and trying all those things, but then not really trying them, instead of that, I would just pick one and really try it and really learn it.
Yeah.
And do that when you're preparing, so that when you get into the session, you kind of know what you're doing. You can intentionally reach for certain things because you made notes and you've wrote it on your cab, or you made a note on your computer. You know the go-tos. You know how to address a certain problem, a certain situation, how to approach it, how to solve a problem, and you're not. Yeah, it's not a crapshoot anymore where you're just hoping for the best.
Yeah, it really bears saying and probably repeating, knowing us, that if you are thinking, I think I need to add another amp or speaker or layer in 2 more mics, there's probably a problem. You should be really happy with one, and adding another. Normally that's a sign that maybe you need to replace, not add. Like maybe you've just got the wrong tool in front of you and you need to be using a different tool altogether. Now that's not always the case. I've definitely done multi-amp setups that I've loved and multi-mic setups I've loved. But usually it's like, all right, we could get by with this one mic, but I bet if we just added this, like here's a classic example: 57 on the cab, close to center. Like, okay, that is the sound of a guitar. I'm so used to hearing it. It sounds perfect. But I think if we added a ribbon mic a little further to the outside, we'd probably get some warmth in there and dull this up a little bit, and just fatten it up. That's probably going to work. But it's because it's like, okay, we got the tone, but we just want to alter it a little bit. We want to augment it a tiny bit. It's not like we need these 2 to get the sound. It's like I probably could have done the same thing with an EQ.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, totally right. That's where these classic combinations, like classic approaches, come from, like the 57 and the Royer 121, for example. This is because of that. But again, just to prove your point there, that it's not necessary often, are people like CLA and TLA, like the Lord LG brothers, the mixers, the legendary ones. I've heard I think I've even mentioned it on the podcast before. I've seen an interview with Tom Lord LG, who said whenever he gets sent sessions with multiple guitar mics on a single amp, he says like, I'm just looking for the one that says 57 and then immediately delete all the rest. So
yeah, and I get it. Like honestly, if when I get sent multiple tracks too, I quickly listen, and if I like, I'll probably find the 57 solo and then bring in the other ones one at a time. And if it's like not an immediate, I'm stoked, it's just like that's gone. Oh, this one kind of works. Okay, it'll live there for at least 30 seconds longer until I probably get rid of it too. But like sometimes it works. But like if it doesn't work right away, it shouldn't be there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so yeah, I hope I think you have plenty of things to experiment with now and things to think about, and most importantly, I hope it makes you think about how to utilize the things better that you already have, and get the most out of them before you move on to the next thing, because you'd be surprised how much you can do with just one simple rig, one simple mic, one amp sim, whatever you have. Just trying to get the most out of that by playing and by learning the thing and by carefully choosing how you want to capture it with the least amount of gear possible, I think.
Totally.
All right.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for listening, and see you next week. Bye-bye.